What's up, folks? I am Jayme Bedingfield. You are listening to my podcast, Too Many Words, a place for readers and writers, especially those with a soft spot for the otherworldly. Welcome to the show. Thanks for clicking my way. And while you are clicking, you can hop over to patreon.com/too-many-words and pledge your support to the show. For as little as $1 a month, you gain access to fun exclusives and get to listen to the weekly episodes earlier than everyone else. And if you aren't able to do that, leaving a review on iTunes and Stitcher would rock. Reviews are super clutch in building visibility in the podcast marketplaces, and building is good. It keeps this little show of mine going. So I appreciate you taking the time. Pick a 5-star review to read during an episode. One that I read that made me smile, made me feel good. It was on Stitcher from somebody named Octa Book Girl, and she says, I found out about this podcast through my writing group. The host, Jayme, is a funny comfort, and her guests are fantastic. The conversations are real and helpful. Great book recommendations and writing advice and inspiration in one shot. Well, that makes me happy. I like that. Feels good to, hear that what I'm doing is working for you. Listening to other writers and talk about their journeys, it helps me. So it feels good to hear that I'm helping others with my rambling. And I agree, my guests are fantastic. One more thing, some of you have heard me been talking about this, but My Body, My Words is out now, and it's a collection of powerful essays that explores body image from just so many beautiful voices, and it's edited by Lauren Kleiman and Amy Archer. And I'm honored to have my essay, The Scars That Make Me, included in such awesome company. Bustle named the collection a feminist book that can change your year. That is pretty cool, and I'm excited about it. Definitely pick it up, give it a read. And so I have a great conversation with you today. I have author Lydia Kang on the show, and we get into her fabulous recent release, The November Girl, and witches and storms and the impact that dysfunctional family has, and intense times can make for intense relationships. I really enjoyed the story. It's told in 2 first-person perspectives, Anda and Hector, and they are both very much still on my mind. So I'd definitely pick it up. And I'd also look up Lydia Kang if you aren't already familiar with her work. She's got lots of great titles out. So definitely give it a gander. And I will be back with Lydia Kang after these notes. Lydia, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm feeling recharged for the first time in a while, which is nice. It took this whole week pretty much off. I'm not naturally good at taking time off, so like the first couple of days, my mind was still working, but my body was doing puzzles.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a little while to decompress and actually relax.
Yeah, well, and relaxing in general is just, it's not something that comes easy to me at all. It's something that I have to relaxing and having fun. I actually have to work myself into it. It's like, okay, Jayme, you can have fun now. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have to give yourself permission to do that sometimes, but it can be a little hard, especially if you're a work kind of person. Mm-hmm. And I'm like that too, so I totally get that.
And I'm sure there's, it's like this with a lot of different careers, but there's the world of words. It's all, you never really feel like you're done. So it's hard to feel like, at least for me, it's hard to feel like, oh, okay, I've actually accomplished something. Now you can stop working and, relax a little bit.
I know. I have a tendency to, when I finish a deadline and I have time before I need to work on my next deadline or my next project, I find myself rushing around looking for something to do. And that's usually when I start deep cleaning my house and organizing in a frenzy. So, yeah. So it's if I'm not actually on a bona fide vacation, with my family, I get really anxious because I can't, I'm just so used to being on that treadmill of doing stuff. So yeah, I totally get that.
No, I'm the same way. And yeah, my floors are so clean when I'm between projects. My laundry is actually folded.
You should see my book closet. I just Instagrammed it like a week or so ago. This was like my project, my in between project. Like I had books and office supplies and things all over the house. And anytime I needed to mail something, it would take me like 15 minutes to like put one thing together because I'd be running, and I organized it all. And it's like this beautiful thing. It just gives me so much happiness.
Oh, that's awesome. I need that. Yeah, I have I have my key office, but I also like have all these spots all over the house where like I like to work. So I feel like I have to go on like a foraging mission when it's time to, like, it's like, okay, my one notebook's in there, the pen I want to use is in here. I need this book, and that's, downstairs.
Yeah, that's me. That's what I was doing too. So I tried to like put most of it in one place, and it's a lot better now.
Nice.
Oh my god, my dog just farted. Oh god, it smells so bad. It's like you have your sleeping dog, and I have my farting dog. Piper, what did you eat for breakfast? Oh my gosh.
Oh no, I hear ya. I've got two of my dogs are both boys, and they're over 110 pounds, and they can fill a room, man. Oof.
Oh boy. Yeah, mine is 10 pounds.
Oh man.
And she just, I don't know what. It's impressively powerful. It's like her superpower.
Nice. That's that's actually great. I love that, the idea. You have like an anti-hero character, and they've got a dog that just like lays down these epic farts.
I know. It's like Walter the Farting Dog.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a great book.
I loved reading that to my kids.
It's a good one.
So I finished reading The November Girl yesterday. It really it's going to be in my head for a while. I loved it so
Oh,
much.
wow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anda and Hector, they both just gave me hope and broke my hearts, and gave me, my heart, and gave me hope, and they were both so very complex characters.
Yeah, it was quite a process writing them. It started out with ideas of who they were, and as it always happens, I write down my first, the first draft, and realize that their journeys are not quite complete, or not don't have the depth that they need, and then they get kind of worked on with every subsequent draft until they show up. So it's like it took a lot of work to get them to where they are now, thanks to my editor Kate Bronning and my beta readers who were really, really helpful. So, and it was a couple years process, actually, because I wrote the book a while ago, several years ago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it took a little while for it to find the right home, and went through a couple different passes as far as like tweaking and stuff like that. So I'm really happy with how they turned out, but it was definitely a process for me.
Well, I could, I was thinking that, as I was reading it, I was creating and managing Anda had to have been challenging.
In a lot of ways, she was easy. There were certain things
Really?
about her that I think were very easy, and maybe it's me. It's strangely enough, like it's easy for me to kind of disengage from reality when I'm writing. How do I explain this? Like there were scenes in some of my books where people are delirious, or they are sleep deprived, or they're under the influence of medication or something like that, or they're sick, and it causes their mentation to be off. Those scenes and scenarios are easier for me to write. I find them to be a little bit more poetic, because you really get to let go of the confines of reality. And with Anda, I got to let go all the time, because she kind of only has like her toe dipped in the world that we know it, the civilized world. So most of the time writing her, it was like a dream. It was like writing poetry.
Oh, wow.
So I really, really enjoyed it. She was less hard for me to write. Hector was a lot more difficult, to be honest.
Okay. Well, yeah, Hector, he's got so much going on. And I really like the way that you allow the reader to collect Hector. You get pieces of him, and at a time, and I feel like that's incredibly realistic, as far as, somebody that is dealing with such trauma it's not something that you understand as the person going through it. So I really love the way that Hector and gave pieces of himself to the reader as the story progressed.
Yeah, it was Hector was a learning process for me, and I adore him so much as a character. In some ways, it was kind of easy doing them because they were so different from each other. It was like very easy to keep their voices separate. They were coming from such different perspectives and lives. But I really tried to handle Hector the way that I would with anybody who's holding inside a really terrible internal emotional scar. You know, it's not something that people just you see when you first talk to them, or you learn the first time you meet them. It takes a lot to get to that, to admit to it, and so I knew that it was going to have to be something I'd have to unfold a little slowly.
Hector's past was something that you knew about when you started drafting, or is it something that you discovered?
Yeah. Most of the books that I write, for the most part, like I know what the ending of the book is before I start, and whatever are the big secrets, the big reveals, I usually have them um, well established in my head before I write. So I knew what was going to happen in the book. I wasn't always exactly sure how it was going to happen, but I knew that they would be revealed at some point in time, and I knew that there would be certain conflicts. So all that has to be set to go. I'm not really a good pantser. I can't just come up with an idea and just start writing from page one and just sort of see where the story takes me. I've never been able to do that. I tend to plot pretty comprehensively up to the point where there's a scene. So I might know, like, okay, in this chapter, Anda and Hector are going to meet, but I won't necessarily know exactly how it's going to happen or what they're going to say or do when it happens. So from that perspective, I do kind of sort of fly by the seat of my pants in the scene. But overall, structure-wise, I usually know what's going to happen.
I find myself, in a similar camp. I can't lose myself in what I'm writing unless I know where I'm going. I don't need to know all the details. In fact, I can't know all the details of how I get there, but I need to have like the big things established in my head.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way. And that's when I know I'm having trouble with my plot and my direction, is if I'm stuck in a scene and I don't know what to do with it. It's often because I haven't figured something out right. I haven't plotted it out right, or I haven't figured out what the next step is. And so I can't take a step forward unless I can see like one or two steps beyond that. And I can see the horizon. So yeah, I'm exactly the same way.
A lot of years ago, when I was still like learning my process and learning how to get myself, into the places that I need to get to, I didn't really realize that I kept getting stuck because I needed to figure something out more. Process is such a tricky thing. Like you have to like figure out that it's some part of your brain telling you that that's not your process or you need this, and it's so easy to mistake that helpful voice for, like the unhelpful inner critic.
Yeah, that's oh god, that is such a struggle all the time. My inner critic has gotten worse, and well, I shouldn't say worse, has gotten pickier as the years go by, to the point where it can be really frustrating because I'll just berate myself for every sentence I write that's not well written, knowing that of course this is going to go through X number of revisions and that sort of a thing. But it can be just really hard to get through that. But on top of that, like I do notice that if I'm struggling through writing certain passages, it's usually because of one of two things. There's usually something wrong with the plot at that point. Like there's something that I've done that is not working, or I'm really forcing a scene that isn't meant to be, or it's either that or it's like perfectly normal. Like I'm just in the middle of the novel, or I'm about 2/3 of the way through and I'm starting to get really fatigued of the story, and I'm having trouble sort of lifting myself up and being like, you can do it, you can get to the end, and I'm just sort of like, oh, I gotta do the scene, but it's gonna be so bad, and this whole thing is so bad. It's so messy, and there are problems all over the place. So usually it's one of those two things. It's just the tedium of writing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love writing, but there is a certain amount of tedium of just sitting down, getting the words down, getting the story down, versus, just the actual, like, is it tedium or is this really not working? And generally, after thinking about it, driving around, going to sleep, waking up the next day, it usually reveals itself to be one problem or another. Or I just sort of talk it out with a friend, and sort of explain why I'm struggling. And they usually can ask a couple illuminating questions to help me figure out like why I'm having trouble with that area.
Yeah, talking it out really helps. That's something. Well, right before I decided to take like a spur of the moment week off, I've been working on this just epic, really hard rewrite, and I was getting to a point where I went from feeling really good about it to hating everything about it.
Yeah, that's pretty normal.
And then
I
I
usually go through that during my like with my first editorial letter, is where I'm sort of like, oh God, this is just a god awful mess, and what have I done? And ugh,
Mhm.
terrible feeling.
Yes, yes. And this has been a really tough revision, and I'm past the halfway mark, but I'm still in the trenches. And yeah, I was just looking at it, I was hating everything about it, and then I was getting it out of my office, and then just like focusing about like how everybody's being too loud in my house, and then everything's dirty. So I was like, okay, take a breath.
Oh yeah, that totally happens to me too. Generally, when I'm in revisions, I'll find everything to distract me from doing the revisions because the revisions are harder
Hmm.
than deep cleaning my bathroom or doing a load of laundry. Um, Everything seems like much more fun of a task, and I find that when that happens, like usually when I'm doing revisions, I'm a really visual person, and so I need to see like visual progress. So I will sort of rewrite all the notes about how I need to do my revision, and there will be like these like sort of big macro things I need to change. There will be like really tiny things to change, and I will color code them, and I'll put little boxes next to them so that every time I actually accomplish something, I can check it off. And just the action of being able to flip pages, check things off, cross stuff out to show that I'm making progress helps me a lot. And I have always been like that. I've always been very sort of goal oriented and like visual, as far as like, I need to have a to-do list. I need to be able to cross things out and check them off and show that I'm getting things done. So that actually helps me a lot. So if I just sort of can see what I have to do ahead of me, I can see where I've come, not in my manuscript, but on a sheaf of notes next to it that are like all pretty and color coded with boxes and stuff. Um, it makes a huge difference. And so I can't even do a major revision without having gone through that process of reorganizing what I need to do.
Totally. No, I index cards are a big tool for me at that point where I get them down and I can line them all up. And one of the things I had just the release of information in this one part was just all wrong. So I cut that up and I put it on index cards, and I kept moving it around until I found where I liked it.
Yeah, that I've done index cards in the past. Now I find that I need to see more globally what I have to do. So I like getting as many um, changes on the minimum number of pieces of paper possible is the best, and that way I can sort of flip through them and see them. Like it would be even better if it's just all laid out next to me and I can see all the notes all at once, which is usually impossible because I don't have a table that big. Um, but yeah, so it's funny how everybody has their own way of doing it. You just got to find your one way of organizing that stuff, putting it together, and then getting it done.
Yeah,
It's everybody's process is a little bit different, but we all got to go through it. So
it's true. Well, and just discovering process alone is like, it's like writing a book in itself, except it's just all that work to figure out, how you work as a writer.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's like the biggest mystery of like being a writer is like when I before I ever wrote a book, um, my head was just filled with the question of how did they do it? I don't even understand how someone writes a book. Like, how do you write a chapter? How do you even like figure out what the story is going to be? And so that it was the process that was probably the most mysterious to me, and the process just became less of a mystery just by doing.
Hmm.
I would just do one thing, try it out, see how that worked. Um, and so it's kind of like sometimes it's just amazing that so many people, including myself, have like written books without doing it through a class or a program or in school or something. You just like sort of figure it out because there isn't a good book to tell you how to do it. Maybe there is, and I just missed it. I didn't, I didn't have a book. I was really just sort of figuring it all out the first couple times, and then. But that's probably the most intimidating thing about creating a story is not knowing exactly how the mechanics of some of it happens.
Yeah, and some of that is, yeah, I agree with what you said. So much of that is trial by fire. It's how, figuring out how you work as you work and, trying to be honest about, how you can work better or why, it is definitely a hands-on learning experience.
Yeah, you do it like video on it. It's just you have to just get in the trenches and do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's just gotta keep plugging. So,
Yep.
oh, so I really love Anda, and what she can do is it's just so interesting. I'm really curious as to how you found her and her abilities.
Well, the whole idea of Anda came about from, that song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot, which is a song that I remember from when I was a kid. I think a lot of people today who are quite a bit younger than me just no idea what the song is because it's a pretty old song. I think it's from the 70s. But in the song that he always spoke of these storms in November called the Witch of November, which is this type of storm that happens on the Great Lakes that are really vicious, and they sink ships all the time, particularly in the month of November. And so these witches, and I thought it was just such a curious thing to do, to take a violent natural phenomenon like a storm on a lake and personify it as something like a witch. So when I first thought about that, I was like, this is not the kind of witch that we grew up with our, grim fairy tale witches. Like this, I could feel that this was like going to be a different type of fantasy entity. And it wasn't going to be, because if you think of nature, in nature, there's a lot of magical stuff to nature, but there's also a lot of very basic black and white stuff. There is life and death, and there are circles of, it's just like the Lion King. There's the whole circle of life thing. There is the kill or be killed and the eat or be eaten. And so there's a lot to it that is very non-magical. And yet there's such beauty that, interspersed with this sort of cycle of death and destruction in life. So I wanted somehow to be able to show all of that as personified by a person and her actions. So I'm not really sure, to be honest. Like, it's not like I knew ahead of time, like I had this list of things like, okay, I'm going to call her Anda and this is what she's going to be able to do. And I wrote it down. It really didn't happen like that. I knew kind of what she was going to be like. I knew kind of what her heritage was going to be like as far as her parentage. And then when I started writing her chapter, I just kind of freeformed it. And, her strangeness and the way that she interacted with people and objects and the island, it just kind of happened. So it's super cheesy, but like, her character kind of organically formed on the page as I wrote her, which is funny because, again, like I said, I'm not a pantser. I'm usually a plotter. But it was one of the most fun and profound experiences for writing that I've ever had. Like, it was really being able to let loose and enjoy my creativity when I wrote her. I just had the best time writing her chapters. They were just gloriously fun.
That's awesome. No, she's so cool, and I love how you handle the magic in it so much. It's her ability is so a part of her, and you show that in really cool ways.
Thank you. Thank you. It was kind of a challenge to try to figure out how her own powers would interact with the island and the lake working around her, separately, through her, from her, and also with her mother. Uh, so all that sort of had to balance out. It kind of had to make sense. There were some points where things didn't, and I had to sort of revise and change so that the architecture of the sort of laws that I decided on made sense. So it did take some work trying to tweak it, and so it all kind of became a little bit more cohesive. But boy, yeah, she was a lot of fun to write, though.
I could see how she would be. There's so much wild in her that there's less to confine you there as you're writing her. I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. She was a very unconfining character for me to write, for sure. And I think that's honestly, I think that's why a lot of times I don't. Most of my writing is not contemporary. I usually often write with historical fiction, which has its own set of rules, or I write like science fiction, which has its own set of rules. But they are both weirdly, for me, less confining. I know that's real. It sounds really strange, but like when I'm doing like sort of science fiction and futuristic stuff, there's a lot more for me to play with. And when I'm doing historical, I immerse myself in the period, and so I get a certain amount of feeling of being coddled by that period of time. So I kind of know comfortably where I can stretch the limits. But I don't write as much contemporary because I worry that I'm not going to get things right. Like I feel a lot less comfortable because the rules, oddly enough, even though I'm living in them right now, feel a lot more amorphous to me. So
No,
don't ask me why.
I
just
totally get that. My very first book that I wrote and put out there, I have superpowers in a city we're all familiar with. The scenes where I'm in the real world and not being lost by using these powers were my trouble scenes. Like, just describing how somebody is in a room is so much more difficult than describing what moving things with your mind feels like.
Right, exactly. Isn't that strange how like that can be strangely confining? So I have to give my kudos to people who write contemporary young adult fiction. I find it quite frightening, and they do such a great job.
Now, a couple times, like when I was reading certain scenes with Anda, I thought of some mythology surrounding sirens, and I don't know if that was just my own visuals there, or if had some siren-like qualities in mind.
You know what? I didn't actually. I read a good amount of like Greek work and Greek mythology back in college and around that time. And I remember reading about them and sort of what those beings were like. But I have felt a lot more comfortable staying away from established mythology like Greek mythology. So yeah, no, I actually never even considered it when I was writing her. Not at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was the relationship with the water and the boats that, like, to be fair too, I just got done reading, like, I've been doing a lot of reading on sirens, so and other Greek mythology, so that's probably why my mind went there also. But.
Right. Yeah, no, it's absolutely. I mean, I can totally see why you'd put those together. And there is something really frightening about water in general. And the idea that some sort of non-human like creature that just add that to water is just like a recipe for a lot of fear and disaster. So I totally get it. So yeah.
So it must have been a big contrast going from Anda to Hector, just because I would imagine that they just give you completely different tools to work with as far as narrative voice.
Yeah, their narrative voices were very, very different. That being said, you know how people always say, like, oh, if you're reading something, at the same time that you're writing something, it's very easy for that, what you're reading, to sort of cross over and affect your writing style. And you start to sort of pick up the narrative voice or style of the person that you're reading.
Yeah.
The work that you're reading. And so I've done that. I find that when I write, I can't read the same type of fiction as what I'm writing. And so when I'm writing YA, let's say if I'm writing YA science fiction, I will not read YA science fiction, or I will not read anything that's vaguely similar, because I'm afraid of picking up on that on someone else's voice. I do that very easily. So the problem with writing dual POV is that they bleed into each other. So it was the best scenario because Anda and Hector have such distinct voices. But at the same time, I still did it. So there were times where my beta reader was like, "Hey, Hector just said this, and it just totally sounds like it came out of Anda's mouth, and just be very careful." So her poetic way of speaking and thinking bled into Hector's chapters. It never was the other way around. But the prose definitely sort of leaked onto his page a lot, and I had to clean it up and change things so that it really stayed. We really stayed in his head the whole time.
Well, it makes sense. I like hearing that, because Anda she's a force. So the fact that she was the one that was creeping in on the other one, it's very
That's
to
very,
character.
very true. And I think, like, just being in a place like on Isle Royal, like it affects you in a weird way. I mean, it's I actually got to visit not this past summer, but the summer before. It was basically like before we went into copy edits, and the book was sort of ready to go. I was like, I have to go to this island because I've done all this research. I'm kind of far away, but it still was sort of in the Midwest. I'm like, I need to go and visit and sort of see what this island is all about, even though I spent, all this time writing about it. And when we went there, it kind of just blew me away. I mean, it really, when you get out into nature after you've been living in the suburbs or the city for a while and doing your suburban lifestyle, it's such a jolt, to realize, like, God, I'm so small and everything here is so much more powerful than me. And it doesn't care that I'm living my life in Omaha, Nebraska. This island doesn't care about that. It was a really a good experience for me to get into that mindset, and it does affect you. So I could imagine how Hector living there just for a short period of time, like, it would just change the way he thought and saw things, and it did. I mean, it really. I think aside from what happened with him and Anda, he had a respect for the island. By the end of the book, he speaks of it. That was life changing, and I think that putting yourself in an experience and putting yourself in the hands of nature can have that kind of profound experience. So I think that's what happened to Hector a bit.
That's really cool. I just I really enjoy their relationship. And now the fact that, so you have, it's very focused on the two characters. For the most of the story, it's in this one location. Did you find it challenging to, keep the pace quick? I'm wondering what's happening next. It's a very, nothing, there's no lagging time at all in it.
Yeah, that was a problem. Everything happens on the island, and the book is a lot more character driven than it is plot driven. Even though there is some major stuff that happens, in the last third of the book that's pretty dramatic. But because of that, one of the editors that initially read it was like, "This is a character-driven novel. It needs more plot." And I was like, "But that's the whole point. It's a more character-driven novel, and so there is going to be less plot."
Yeah.
So I did have to work hard on keeping the pace up and making sure they weren't dawdling too long. They weren't just being super introspective and not moving. That was difficult for me because the first books that I wrote, Control and Catalyst, were both science fiction that were very much plot driven. There was just like a ton of activity going on there. Stakes were always rising, things were happening, explosions and all that kind of stuff. So this was very different for me. It was such a quieter place, but it had so much more of a sense of this sort of simmering power and menace via nature.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out how to harness that kind of that sort of danger in the book without like really dramatic kind of cartoonish things happening. So it was difficult, and I think there were some editors who originally, when we pitched it and we went out on submission, I think there were some editors that were like, I don't know what to do with this because it's technically fantasy, contemporary fantasy, or what some people would have called magical realism. It's not quite the proper term here, but and people didn't know what to do with it. They were like, it's not this and it's not that, and it's kind of a contemporary, but it's not contemporary, but like it's kind of paranormal, but it's definitely not like your typical paranormal why. But so it was just, and that was one of the issues that I think it had from the beginning, was that it was its own beast and it wasn't very easily classifiable. But that's just the way it is. It's not like I didn't really design it to be difficult. It just kind of happened that way. So.
Yeah, well, ideas don't, I was talking about this with another writer a couple weeks ago, was that, like ideas and inspiration don't necessarily, aren't going to go by genre.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. I get these ideas that I fall in love with, and I decide that I'm going to write them. And then in the end, like if you ask me to pitch them in like a succinct soundbite in something that sounds like really awesome, like, this is going to be the YA version of The Martian. None of my books, I can't do that with any of them. And that's, I don't know. It's call it good or bad. I guess it depends on your point of view, but mine are never easy to classify well.
I hear you. No, my current project, I guess I would call it post-apocalyptic high fantasy. But again, that doesn't really
see what I mean?
Yeah. And saying that out loud kind of terrifies me, because it's like, that doesn't, but yeah.
But that sounds like, to me, that sounds awesome. That sounds like super awesome. And and then we're left with doing comps like, it's kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets, Star Wars, and you're like, oh my God, did I just say that? Like, how's anybody gonna understand what that means? But I think it says something that you have something that is not easily associated with something else, because it's new and different, so that's not a bad thing either, I don't think.
Well, thank you. But it's just always, every phase, it doesn't matter where, there's always some sort of like nerve-wracking aspect to it if you choose to focus on that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But Lydia, can you tell everybody where they can find you online?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Lydia Y Kang, and I'm on Instagram at Lydia Kang. And those are probably the two social media things that I do the most. But probably Instagram is like my super favorite social media. I'm there probably the most. And I have a Facebook author page, Author Lydia Kang. You can find me there as well. Oh, and also there's my website. So on my website, I have a list of upcoming events, as well as media stuff that pops up and information on my new books. I have 2 books coming out at the end of this year. One is called Toxic. It's also out with Entangled Teen, and it's about a Korean girl in space dying on a sentient ship. And the second book is called The Impossible Girl, and that's actually an 1850s historical murder mystery involving grave robbery, and that's out with Lake Union.
Both of those sound awesome.
See what I mean by like, I can't very easily just
1850s grave robbery.
There's
cool.
a big kind of terrible history in the records of medical education when it comes to grave robbery. So decided to try to tackle that one. Yep.
Well, I'll be looking forward to those.
Thank you. And what's your book going to be called?
Right now, I just have a working title for it, which is Efflorescence. I don't know if that's going to be the actual title yet.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you. Hopefully I can, this has been so hard. So I hope I come out on the other side of it. Well,
sometimes the hardest ones are the ones that are really worth working on. So keep it up.
Well, it's just so interesting to me, and something that like is definitely, I wasn't aware of until it happened, was that, you can have, or you can know what the story is, but not know how to tell it. And like my first stab at this was I didn't hit the
Right.
place that I needed to. The story didn't come through. So now it's like, taking a step back and listening to that voice and actually letting the story come through the way it's supposed to come through.
Right. That's hard.
It is.
You got your work cut out for you. But if you do it and you really sort of try to dismantle that sort of construct that's making it not work well, it can be really worth it. So
well, it's a great feeling when you do step away and you get that. Oh, that's how it works. I love it. I love it.
I know. There is like something definitely to be said about time and distance from your manuscript. It's the one thing that I regret about like having to write books in a short period of time, and is not having that distance, because then you can see it with fresh eyes and see all your mistakes much better. But if you have the time to be able to like let it sit for a while and then come back to it, gosh, that's super helpful.
It really is. But well, Lydia, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Definitely. That wraps this week up. Thanks for sharing your time. Be sure to join the conversation, the Too Many Words community, on Twitter at me Bedingfield and at Too Many Words Pod, over on patreon.com/too many words, and you can email the show at too many words pod@gmail.com. Good luck writing, happy reading, be kind, and I'll talk to you next week with Monica Murphy.